The cleaning cart had a wheel that clicked every third rotation, and Caleb Reyes had long since stopped hearing it. It was 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and the 43rd floor of the Marchetti Tower was empty the way corporate floors are empty at that hour. Not silent, exactly, but humming. The HVAC exhaling through the ceiling. The fluorescent panels giving off their small electric whine. The city beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows blinking in the wet dark. Headlights moving slow along Michigan Avenue, 43 stories down. Caleb pushed the cart past the glass partition of the executive corridor and stopped at the double doors at the end. He did not look at the name etched into the frosted glass. He had learned not to look at names. Names made a floor feel like a place with people in it, and a place with people in it was harder to leave clean. He let himself in with his master key card. The office was dark. He flicked on the underdesk task light rather than the overheads, a courtesy he extended to every office, because overhead fluorescence cast the kind of glare that made a space feel interrogated, and something in Caleb rebelled against that, even at midnight, even in a room no one was in. He set down the vacuum. He wiped the glass conference table with a microfiber, slow, even passes. He emptied the wastebasket, one crumpled Post-it, an empty sparkling water can, a receipt for a dinner that had cost more than his weekly grocery budget. He registered all of it and none of it. A good cleaner saw without seeing. He was 41 years old. He had been doing this for 3 years. Before that, there had been another life. The shift ended at 4:30 in the morning. Caleb clocked out in the basement service corridor, signed the log for his supervisor, Reggie, and took the freight elevator down to the parking garage, where his 2008 Ford Ranger was parked under the yellow sodium lamp by the east wall. He drove the 22 minutes home to the one-bedroom apartment in Little Village in the particular silence of a man who had learned to pace his thoughts like a long run. No sprinting, no stopping, just keep the rhythm. His daughter was asleep on the couch with the television on low. Mrs. Delgado, the widowed retired teacher who lived across the hall and watched Maya on the nights he worked late, looked up from her crossword and held a finger to her lips. She tried to wait up, Mrs. Delgado whispered. Made it until about 1. She has school. I know me, Joe. She knows, too. Mrs. Delgado gathered her sweater. The tamales are in the fridge. I made extra. Mrs. Delgado. Don't. She waved him off. I am old, and I'm not sleeping, and I have no one to cook for. Eat them, or I'll be offended. She let herself out. Caleb stood in the small, warm kitchen for a moment, listening to the apartment. 7-year-old Maya breathed the shallow, fast breaths of a child who had given in to sleep against her will. On the coffee table was her science notebook, open to a half-finished page about the water cycle. Beside it, a cup of juice she had not drunk. The television was playing a cartoon on mute. He bent down, slid his arms under her. She weighed almost nothing. She was small for her age, and she had been since the fevers at 3, and there was no talking about it without talking about her mother. So he had simply stopped talking about it. Dad, Maya said, muffled, eyes still closed. Did you come home? I came home, Mija. Okay, good. He carried her down the short hall to her room, laid her under the covers, and she curled toward the wall the way she always did. On the shelf, above her bed, the little paper certificate from her second-grade teacher. Most curious student, Mrs. Alvarez's class, caught the light from the hall. He stood there a minute, watching her breathe. Then he went back to the kitchen, stood at the counter, and ate 2 of Mrs. Delgado's tamales standing up because sitting down this late meant not getting back up. He was in bed by 5:15. The alarm would go off at 6:40 because Maya had to be at the school by 7:30, and he had to be at night class by 9 o'clock because a man does not stop moving just because the direction he's moving in has changed. If the story is already pulling at something in you, hit the like button and subscribe to Quiet Kind. And drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. He was just a single dad. No one saw him coming. Keep watching. Marchetti Holdings occupied floors 38 through 45 of the tower on Michigan. It was not the biggest firm in the city, but it was one of the oldest, a private investment company that had quietly restructured more than half the distressed manufacturing firms in the Midwest over the last 30 years. The woman who ran it was named Eleanor Marchetti. She was 51 years old. She had inherited the company from her father at 38, and in the 13 years since she had roughly tripled its holdings and approximately halved the number of people who liked her. This was not, Eleanor understood, her problem. A woman who ran a private equity firm in this city did not need to be liked. She needed to be correct, and she needed to be unafraid, and she needed to be in the room. What she did not have, what she had never quite had, even when her father was alive, was anyone who saw her when she was not being any of those things. Her husband had walked out in 2019. Her son was at boarding school in Connecticut. Her mother had died the previous fall, and the silence that had moved into her 62nd floor apartment after the funeral had not left. She worked late because the alternative was going home, and going home was an exercise she had lost the taste for. On the night Caleb Reyes cleaned her office for the first time, she was not there. She was in Sao Paulo. On the night Caleb Reyes cleaned her office for the 14th time, she was. It was a Thursday in late October. The rain had been falling since 3 in the afternoon, the hard, flat rain of a city that had decided to be done with summer. And Eleanor had stayed in her office because a call with her London counsel had run until 9, and then the regulatory memo had come in from her general counsel at 9:40. And then she had simply failed to leave. She was at her desk when the cleaner came in. She heard the key card, the soft click of the door, the small, practiced noise of a cartwheel. She did not look up. She assumed he would see her and go. He did not go. He stood in the doorway for exactly the amount of time it took to register that the room was occupied, and then he said, in a quiet, even voice, "I apologize, ma'am. I'll come back." "No," Eleanor said, still not looking up. "Do what you need to. I won't be in your way." "Ma'am, I can come back." "I said do what you need to." It came out sharper than she had intended. She glanced up for the first time. The cleaner was perhaps 40, perhaps a little past it. Dark hair going gray at the temples. Navy uniform, the Marchetti building patch on the breast pocket. He had the kind of posture that did not belong to a man who had spent his whole life pushing a cart. He inclined his head. "Thank you, ma'am." He did not ask her to move. He did not ask her what she was working on. He did not perform his presence in any way. He emptied her wastebasket, wiped the small sideboard by the door, vacuumed the rug around her desk in short, quiet passes that did not once come closer than 4 feet to where she was working. He was, she realized, deliberately giving her the room. It had been a long time since anyone had given her the room. When he was finished, he paused at the door. "Good night, ma'am." She looked up again. She opened her mouth to say good night and found, absurdly, that she did not remember the last time she had said the word out loud to anyone. "Good night," she said. He went out. The door closed with the same small, considered click it had opened with. Eleanor sat for a moment with her hand on her keyboard. Then she went back to the memo. She did not know why she glanced at the clock. She did not know why she noticed that he had spent exactly 11 minutes in her office, and that her wastebasket, which had been 3/4 full of shredded drafts from a deal she had killed that afternoon, was now empty and relined with a fresh bag, the corners neatly tucked. She did not know why, an hour later, when she finally packed her bag and took the elevator down, she found herself looking at the cleaning cart parked outside the next executive office down the hall, and at the man kneeling beside it, carefully wiping a scuff off the baseboard. Not because anyone would notice, but because it was there. She went home. She did not think about him. That was what she told herself. The friction, when it came, did not come from Eleanor. It came from a man named Peter Halloran, who was 47 years old, a senior vice president in Marchetti's acquisitions group, and a man who had decided approximately 11 years ago that he should have been running the company instead of the woman whose name was on the door. Peter was the kind of man who filled the room before he entered it. He arrived on the 43rd floor each morning at 7:15 with a large hot coffee and a larger personality, and he had opinions about everything. The markets, the weather, the people beneath him on the org chart, and particularly the night cleaning crew, whom he considered, in his words, a slipshod operation. The first time Peter saw Caleb was on a Wednesday morning at 6:40. Caleb was finishing his shift. Peter was arriving early to catch the pre-markets. They passed in the hallway outside the elevator bank, and Peter paused long enough to register the uniform, the cart, the man, and then he said, not to Caleb, but to the receptionist who had just arrived, loudly enough for Caleb to hear, "I've told them 3 times the night people are supposed to be gone by 6. This isn't a hostel." The receptionist, A young woman named Priya looked mortified. Caleb simply kept moving, pushing his cart into the freight elevator, and the doors closed on Peter Halloran's back. In the elevator, Caleb let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. He knew the type. He had worked with 10,000 Peter Hallorans in his other life. The trick he had learned was not to take it personally. A man like that was not diminishing you. He was simply announcing himself. The diminishment was a byproduct. Still, there was a quality to the sound of it. The night people that followed Caleb home on the train that morning and stayed with him through breakfast with Maya, and was still there when he kissed her forehead at the school gate and watched her walk in with her backpack that was nearly as big as she was. The night people. He had been called worse. He had been called much worse by much more powerful men in rooms where he had been the one with authority. That was part of what he had left behind. He just had not expected the small sting of it here and now in a life he had built specifically to be free of men like that. He shook it off by the time he reached the apartment. He made himself sleep. What Caleb did not know, what he could not have known, because he had made a particular decision about what kind of attention he was willing to carry in his life anymore, was that his name was, at that very moment, on a wall. Not the Marchetti wall. A different wall. 4 blocks south and 61 floors up, in the lobby of a building he had not entered in 3 years. It was an award wall. A single long panel of brushed steel with 11 names etched into it, each one accompanied by a small engraved plaque, each plaque naming a contribution to the field of structural materials engineering that had, in the judgment of the Cheney Institute, fundamentally advanced the public understanding of building safety in the 21st century. His name was the 9th from the top. Caleb R. Reyes, 2019, for the Reyes method of predictive stress modeling in high-rise substructures. The plaque did not say that the Reyes method had been adopted by 4 municipal building codes before its author turned 38. It did not say that the Reyes method had, by conservative estimate, saved a number of lives that could not be calculated because the deaths it had prevented had, by the nature of prevention, never happened. It did not say that Caleb Reyes had been the youngest Cheney laureate in the history of the award, or that he had stood on the stage in 2019 and accepted it with his wife in the front row, or that his wife had been diagnosed with a stage for glioma 4 months later, or that she had died 13 months after that, leaving a husband who had, in the rawest part of his grief, made a decision that nobody who knew him had been able to talk him out of. He had stepped away, not from engineering, from the life around it. The consulting contracts, the expert testimony, the firm where he had been a named partner by 36. He had told his old colleagues it was temporary. He had told himself, in the small hours when he was honest, that he did not know what it was. What he had known was that Maya had watched her mother disappear in increments over the course of a year, and that he had been absent for too many of those increments because the consulting calendar was what it was, and that when he came home the night Sarah died, he had realized, looking at his 4-year-old daughter on the floor of the living room playing with a puzzle and not yet understanding what gone meant, that every hour of the rest of his life needed to be structured around one question. Did I see her today? A cleaning shift was 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. It got him to her breakfast table. That was, for the first 2 years, the only reason that mattered. He had not thought, had not let himself think about whether he would eventually return to the work. He had a daughter who had lost her mother. His job was to be the one thing in her world that did not disappear. 3 years in, he was starting to think about it again. He was starting to take a night class at the community college 2 days a week. Not in engineering, but in applied mathematics, the way a man tests whether he can still run by jogging around the block. He was starting to remember that his hands, which had once built things, were still his hands. He had not told anyone at Marchetti. He had not told anyone, period. It was his quietly, the way certain things had to be, for a while, before they could be anything else. Maya had a science fair in the second week of November. Caleb took the afternoon off, unpaid, negotiated a week in advance with Reggie, who understood without having to be told, and he sat in a plastic folding chair in the Holman Elementary Gymnasium and watched his daughter stand in front of a trifold poster board labeled "How Bridges Stay Up" in careful purple marker. The other parents were mostly mothers. Caleb had long since stopped noticing that. He had been the only father at most of Maya's school events for 3 years. He nodded at the ones he recognized, kept to himself with the ones he didn't, and found his seat. Maya's project was about load distribution. She had drawn, with some help but not much, a careful diagram of a suspension bridge with little arrows showing the paths the weight took through the cables to the towers to the foundations. She had a small model built from drinking straws and dental floss. The model, Caleb observed with some interest, was structurally sound. She had figured out the triangulation herself. When it was her turn, the judge, a tired-looking man in a polo shirt from the local engineering college, there as a volunteer, asked her to explain her project. Maya took a breath. "A bridge stays up," she said, "because the weight has somewhere to go. If the weight doesn't have somewhere to go, the bridge falls down. So when you build a bridge, you have to give the weight a path." The judge's eyebrows lifted just slightly. "And where does the weight go?" he asked. "Down the cables," Maya said. "Into the towers. Into the ground. The ground holds everything." She pointed to her diagram. "My dad says the ground is the most important part, and everybody forgets about it." The judge looked for the first time at Caleb. Caleb kept his face very still. "Your dad sounds like he knows about bridges," the judge said. "He knows about a lot of things," Maya said. "He just doesn't talk about it." She won second place. She was extremely gracious about it. Caleb took her out for ice cream afterward, and she insisted on the bus rather than the truck because the bus was more fun, and they sat in the back and she leaned against his arm and said, without looking up, "The judge knew you, Dad." "He doesn't know me, Mija. He looked at you like he knew you." Caleb did not answer. Maya, with the particular wisdom of 7-year-olds, did not press. Outside the bus window, the city slid by in the early dark of a November evening, and the lights of the tower on Michigan, Eleanor Marchetti's tower, though Caleb did not know to think of it that way yet, came on one floor at a time against the rising dark. The second time Eleanor Marchetti stayed late enough to cross paths with the cleaner was a Monday, 11 days after the first time. She had not, she told herself, arranged it. She had simply had a call with Singapore that ran past 10, and when her assistant Jane had poked her head in at 10:30 to see if there was anything else before she went home, Eleanor had said no, go, and then she had stayed at her desk with the call transcript and a glass of the sparkling water she kept in the small fridge behind the credenza, and she had worked until she heard the keycard click at 11:52. He came in. He saw her. He said, "I apologize, ma'am. I'll come back." "No," she said. "Come in." He came in. She watched him this time. Not obviously. She kept her eyes on the document on her screen, but she watched him in the way a woman in her position had learned to watch rooms. The peripheral attention of someone who had spent 30 years being the only woman at certain tables and had learned that the most useful information in any room was almost never the information being presented at the front of it. He moved the same way he had the first time. Quiet. Considered. He did not rush. He did not drag. He was economical in a way that suggested he had thought, at some point in his life, about how to do things well. She found herself, against her usual practice, against every instinct she had cultivated for 3 decades in rooms where the wrong word could cost 8 figures, speaking. "What's your name?" He looked up. He did not look startled. He looked, if anything, mildly curious that she had asked. "Caleb, ma'am." "Caleb what?" "Reyes." "How long have you worked on this floor?" "Caleb Reyes." 14 months, ma'am." "And before that?" "I've been with the building service 3 years." She nodded. She turned a page. She did not ask anything else. Caleb finished, inclined his head at the door, said good night, and left. Eleanor sat for a moment in the low light. She could not have said what she was looking for. She had not, in the moment, been looking for anything. She had simply been aware that a person was in her room, and that something about the way he occupied the space had the quality of a person who was not, she searched for the word, diminished by where he was standing. It was, she realized with some discomfort, the first thing in quite a while that had genuinely interested her. Over the next 3 weeks, a small pattern formed, the way patterns do, between 2 people who do not acknowledge them. Eleanor stayed late on Mondays and Thursdays. Not every Monday and Thursday. She was not, she told herself firmly, arranging anything, but often enough that Caleb began, without discussing it with himself, to do her office last on those nights, so as to give her the full hour before midnight to finish her work without feeling rushed. They did not speak much. When they did, it was brief. "How's the weather out there?" "Clearing, ma'am." The wind turned. "Good. My driver gets anxious on the Kennedy in wind." "It's a bad stretch, ma'am." "The crosswind comes off the lake." "You know the city." "I've lived here a long time." That kind of thing. Nothing that would have meant anything to anyone who overheard it. And yet Eleanor, who had not volunteered a personal observation to anyone on her own staff in perhaps a year, found herself saying to a cleaner, one Thursday night at 11:55, without quite meaning to, "My mother died in October." Caleb, who had been wiping down the glass of her sideboard, paused for the smallest beat. Then he said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. It's been a year. That doesn't make it less." She looked up then, fully for the first time in the 5 weeks of this strange arrangement. "No," she said, "it does not." He did not offer anything else. He did not ask about her mother. He did not tell her a story about his own grief, which, she would later realize, he had plenty of. He simply finished his work and left her the room, the way he always did. It was the first time in a year that Eleanor Marchetti had said the words "my mother died" out loud to another human being, and the person she had said them to was the man who emptied her wastebasket. She drove home that night and sat in her car in the garage of her building for 20 minutes before she went up. The friction with Peter Halloran escalated on a Tuesday. Caleb was finishing his shift at 5:50 in the morning, early because he had come in at 7:30 the night before to cover for a colleague whose wife had gone into labor, when Peter Halloran stepped off the elevator on 43 at 5:55 and found Caleb loading the freight elevator with his cart. Peter had a bad morning behind him already. He had not yet had coffee. He had received, overnight, an email from Eleanor declining to advance a deal he had spent 11 weeks building. A deal that Peter believed was the kind of deal that made careers, and specifically made his career, and specifically advanced his argument for the promotion to managing director that Eleanor had been quietly deferring for 2 years. He was, in short, looking for someone to be smaller than him. He stopped in front of the freight elevator. "You people are still here." Caleb did not look up from a cart. "Just finishing, sir. I've said it 3 times. 3. The night crew is supposed to be gone by 5:30. Is that complicated?" "No, sir." "Then why are you still here?" "I came an hour late last night, sir. I stayed an hour later." "That's not how it works." "Understood, sir. Look at me when I'm talking to you." Caleb looked up. Peter Halloran saw, for the first time, Caleb's face. Not the uniform, not the cart. The face. The steady, unafraid, utterly unrattled face of a man who had, Peter sensed in some animal part of his brain, been spoken to by far more dangerous men than Peter Halloran and had not been rattled by them either. It made Peter angrier. Things that did not yield to him made Peter angrier. "What's your name?" "Caleb Reyes, sir. I want you off this floor in the next 5 minutes. I don't want to see you in this elevator bank after 6 a.m. again. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir. If I see you here again, I'm calling your supervisor and I'm having you reassigned. I don't care what kind of night you had." "Understood, sir." Peter stared at him a beat longer. Caleb did not drop his eyes, did not apologize further, did not offer Peter the small collapse that Peter was looking for. He simply waited, with the same still attention he brought to emptying a wastebasket, for the exchange to end. Peter walked away. Caleb finished loading the cart. He took the elevator down. In the basement corridor, he stood for a moment with one hand on the cart and let the small shake in his jaw settle. And then he walked to the supervisor's office and logged out, and he drove home in the gray November dawn with the radio off. Maya was awake when he got home. She was at the table, eating cereal, her hair in the uneven braid Mrs. Delgado had attempted the night before. "You're late," Maya said. "Not bad late. Just late. I know, Mija. Are you okay?" He looked at her. 7 years old. The chip in her front tooth from the playground fall last spring. The careful, serious face of a child who watched her father the way he watched her. "I'm fine." "Okay." She went back to her cereal. Then, without looking up, "Sometimes people are mean to you at work." "What makes you say that?" "Your face, Dad." He sat down across from her. He did not say anything. Maya pushed her cereal bowl halfway across the table toward him, the way she always did when she wanted to share. "Eat," she said. "Mrs. Delgado says the marshmallows are the most important part." He ate a spoonful of his daughter's cereal at 6:15 in the morning, and the small sting of Peter Halloran went where these things always went in the end, into the rhythm of the life he had chosen, underneath the weight of the small person across the table, who was the whole reason any of it held up. If this story has found its way to you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Quiet Kind. Your support is what keeps these stories coming, and there are so many more waiting to be told. 3 nights later, the deal Peter Halloran had been trying to save came apart publicly. Eleanor killed it in the 7:30 a.m. partners meeting. She killed it with a 2-page memo she had drafted herself the evening before, citing specific structural concerns with the target company's real estate portfolio. Concerns, she explained, that had been raised in the preliminary engineering report from the external consulting firm. The consulting firm's name, for anyone who cared to read the footnote, was Hartwell and Reyes Engineering. Peter, reading the memo at the partners' table, did not register the name. There was no reason he would have. Hartwell and Reyes was a mid-sized engineering consultancy that had done work for Marchetti on and off for 8 years. The Reyes on the letterhead was an old name, a legacy partner, a man Peter had heard of in the way one hears of any technical consultant one has never needed to meet personally. What Peter did register was that the engineering report, when he pulled it up later that afternoon, was devastating. The target company's flagship property, a 34-story office building in Cleveland that Peter had toured personally in August, had been quietly losing structural integrity in its substructure for 6 years due to a foundation settling issue that the sellers had concealed through cosmetic repairs and a cooperative inspection firm. The report that identified this was 3 years old. It had been commissioned by a different buyer who had walked away from the property in 2021 and paid to keep the findings private. Eleanor's general counsel had obtained a copy through a contact at the Cleveland Municipal Engineering Board. The author of the report was listed on the title page. Principal Investigator, Caleb R. Reyes, Ph.D. Peter did not read the title page. He read the conclusions. He read the summary of structural risk. He read the estimate of the cost required to remediate the foundation, which was roughly $41 million, which was roughly the entire margin Peter had built into the deal. He understood, reading it, that the deal was dead. He understood that Eleanor had been right to kill it. He understood, in the part of himself that he did not show to anyone, that he had missed something that a more careful acquirer would have caught, and that his argument for the managing director promotion had, in a single memo, become considerably harder to make. He did not think, as he closed the document on his screen, about the name of the report's author. He would later. Eleanor did not stay late that Thursday. She left at 6:30, early for her, because she had a dinner with a board member at Gibson's, and she could not politely push it. At 11:45 that night, Caleb let himself into her office with his key card. He found the room exactly as he had left it the night before. The lamp on the credenza still on its timer. The small framed photograph of a young man in a graduation gown. Her son, he had guessed, still slightly askew, where her cleaning lady presumably always set it down at a small angle Eleanor never corrected. He worked in the usual quiet. He emptied the wastebasket. He wiped the glass of the conference table. He moved to the sideboard. And there, on the sideboard, where it had not been the night before, was a thick manila folder closed with a sticky note on top. The sticky note said, in Eleanor's handwriting, for reading if you have the time. Caleb stared at it. He did not touch the folder. A cleaner does not touch a folder on a CEO's sideboard. A cleaner does not read what a CEO has left out. A cleaner wipes the surface around the folder and moves on, and he does not, under any circumstance, assume that the note is for him. Except the note was on top of the folder on the sideboard, and the sideboard was not where Eleanor put things for her own staff. Her staff would find it on her desk or in Jane's inbox. And Caleb had worked this floor for 14 months, and he had worked this office for 11 weeks, and he knew exactly where on any given surface Eleanor Marchetti left things she wanted a specific person to find. The sideboard, at 11:45 at night, when only one person was in this office, was where Eleanor Marchetti left things for him. He stood with his hand on the microfiber cloth. He thought about Peter Halloran in the elevator bank. He thought about the phrase, the night people. He thought about every rule of his 3-year-old life that said, do the work Go home. Do not mistake the chair you were standing next to for a chair you were meant to sit in. He thought about Maya, who that morning had asked him, over cereal, whether he was okay. He opened the folder. It was the Cleveland Engineering Report. His engineering report. The 2021 report on the 34-story building. The one he had overseen personally. The one that had taken 4 months and had required him to be on site in Cleveland for 11 days during the worst stretch of his wife's decline. The title page was on top. Principal Investigator, Caleb R. Reyes, P. Ph.D. Beneath it, a second sticky note in Eleanor's handwriting. We should talk. He did not, at first, understand the degree of the exposure. He understood, standing there in the half-dark of an office that belonged to a woman who now knew at least one thing about him he had not told her, that she had figured something out. He understood that the report on the sideboard was a report he had written in a prior life, a life he had walked away from 3 years ago. He did not yet understand how she had come to put that report in his hands on a Thursday night at 11:45. He would understand, later, that she had not arranged this the way she arranged most things, methodically, over weeks with multiple contingencies. She had spent one afternoon on it. She had asked Jane, that morning, to pull the CV of the author of the Cleveland Report, and Jane had produced a 2-page document that included the photograph that accompanied the 2019 Cheney Institute Award, and Eleanor had looked at that photograph for a long time. Then she had asked Jane, carefully, whether the Caleb R. Reyes on the CV was the same Caleb Reyes who appeared on the nighttime building services contractor roster. Jane, who was smart, had not asked why Eleanor wanted to know. She had cross-referenced the 2 records quietly through the building's HR system, which was permitted because Eleanor was the sole shareholder of the building services contractor, a fact Caleb did not know, and she had confirmed, at 3:15 that afternoon, that they were the same man. Eleanor had stared at the confirmation for perhaps a minute and a half. Then she had asked Jane to pull the full 2021 report from the General Counsel's files, along with the 2019 Cheney Institute citation, and she had left them both in the folder on the sideboard with a sticky note. She had not, in other words, planned this for weeks. She had planned it for approximately 5 hours. It was not like her. What had changed, what Eleanor herself did not quite have the language for yet, was this. She had watched a man who had written one of the most carefully argued engineering reports she had read in a decade. A report that had, that morning, saved her firm somewhere between $30 and $50 million. Empty her wastebasket for 11 weeks, and she had treated him for 11 weeks as though he were a fixture of the room. She understood with a precision that startled her, exactly the kind of person she had spent 30 years despising. She did not know yet what she intended to offer him. She did not know yet whether he wanted to be offered anything. She knew only that she was not willing, any longer, to sit across a room from a man who had seen a weight-bearing problem no one else had seen and pretend she had not seen him. So she had left the folder. And now, at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday in November, in an office on the 43rd floor of a building whose name was on her family's wall, Caleb Reyes closed the folder, set the microfiber cloth down on the sideboard, and stood for a long moment looking at the city through the glass. He had understood, the moment he read the second sticky note, that the life he had built for 3 years, the small, careful life structured around a 7-year-old girl's breakfast table, had just been seen by somebody in a way he had specifically arranged for it not to be. He had also understood, with a quiet surprise that he did not know quite what to do with, that he was not, in this moment, afraid. He thought, briefly, of his daughter. He thought, briefly, of his wife, who had been dead now for 3 years and 4 months. Then he picked up the folder, tucked it under his arm, took the microfiber cloth and the rest of his supplies back to his cart, and finished the rest of his round on the 43rd floor the way he had finished every round for 14 months. Slowly, carefully, and without missing anything. He took the folder home with him. He did not read it again that night. He set it on the kitchen counter, poured himself a glass of water, stood for a moment at the window looking out at the alley behind his building where the streetlight was out again, and then he went to bed because Maya had school in 4 hours. What he did not know, what Eleanor had not written on note, because she had not yet decided what she would say, was that at 9:15 the following morning, in the partners' meeting on the 43rd floor, Peter Halloran was going to make a specific remark about the night cleaning staff that was going to be the last remark Peter Halloran made in that particular meeting for some time. The Friday morning partners' meeting started at 7:30. Eleanor was at the head of the long glass table in conference room, the one with the view north toward the river. 7 senior partners were seated along the sides. Peter Halloran was in the 4th chair on the right, where he had sat for 11 years. Jane was in the corner with a laptop, taking notes. The agenda had 14 items. They were on item 4, a quarterly review of the real estate portfolio, when Peter, still smarting from the Cleveland deal, made his remark. "While we're on buildings," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I want to flag a facilities issue. The night cleaning staff has been running 45 minutes past their end of shift on this floor for the last 2 weeks. I don't know if it's the supervisor or the contract, but it's a problem. I'd rather not be sharing my elevator with a mop at 6 a.m. One of the partners, a quiet man named David Chun, glanced up from his folder. Eleanor, who had been writing a note in the margin of her printed agenda, stopped writing. She set down her pen. "Peter, who was on your elevator?" Peter looked up. "Sorry, when you were sharing it with a mop. Who was on it?" "One of the cleaners. I didn't catch his name. Tuesday morning. I told him he needed to be out by 5:30. Dark hair. 40, 41. Peter frowned. "I didn't take inventory, Eleanor. Caleb Reyes. If you say so. I say so." The room had gone very quietly still. Eleanor had a way of doing that, of taking the temperature of a conversation down 3 degrees at a time, in a way that made people look up and check the exits before they fully understood why. She turned a page in her folder. She produced a single-page printout and slid it across the table toward Peter. Peter looked at it. It was the title page of an engineering report. The Cleveland Engineering Report. The one that, 29 hours earlier, had killed his deal and, in the process, very likely killed his promotion. His eyes went to the author line. Principal Investigator, Caleb R. Reyes, P., Ph.D. Peter did not yet understand. He looked up. Eleanor slid a second sheet across the table. It was the 2019 Cheney Institute Award citation. The photograph at the top of the citation was in black and white. The man in the photograph was in a dark suit, standing at a podium, accepting a small metal object from a woman whose name Peter vaguely recognized as the former Secretary of Transportation. The man in the photograph had dark hair going gray at the temples and a steady, unperformed way of holding his body, and Peter recognized him immediately with the particular physical sensation of a man who had just swallowed something cold. "Eleanor, the Reyes method," Eleanor said, "has been adopted by the building codes of 4 municipalities, including this one. It is, by the assessment of the structural engineering community, the single most significant advance in predictive high-rise substructure modeling of the last 20 years. The report you were looking at yesterday afternoon, the one that cost you the Cleveland deal, was written by the method's author. The author of the method is the man you told on Tuesday morning to get off your elevator." Peter was silent. "He stepped away from consulting in 2022, Eleanor said. "Personal reasons. I'm not going to share them with this table. They are his to share if he chooses." She looked down the length of the room. "For the last 14 months, she said, Mr. Reyes has worked as a night shift cleaner in this building. For 11 of those weeks, he has cleaned my office. I did not know who he was until yesterday afternoon. The reason I did not know who he was," and here Eleanor paused, and her voice did something that no one at the table had heard her voice do in perhaps 8 years, which was to turn very quietly inward, the way a voice turns when a person is telling a truth primarily to themselves. "The reason I did not know who he was is that I did not think to ask." The room stayed still. "I am telling you this," Eleanor said, "because as of this morning, I am going to ask him. And I would like the partners of this firm to understand clearly that the conversation I intend to have with Mr. Reyes is not a conversation any of you are going to interfere with. Am I understood?" There was a small murmur of assent from around the table. Peter did not make the murmur. Eleanor looked at him. She did not say anything cruel. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at him with the particular steady attention she reserved for problems she had already decided the shape of. And Peter, who had been in rooms with Eleanor Marchetti for 11 years, understood without being told that his argument from managing director was over. He understood something else, too, which was that he was going to spend the rest of his career, however much longer of it he had at Marchetti, being the man who had told Caleb Reyes to get off the elevator. That was a thing he would carry. Eleanor would not have to say another word about it. She moved the meeting to item 5. Caleb arrived at the tower that evening at 7:58 p.m. for his shift. There was a note waiting for him in the basement service corridor, clipped to the cleaning assignment board. It was not from Reggie. It was from Jane. It said, "Mr. Reyes, Ms. Marchetti would appreciate it if you could come up to 43 at your earliest convenience this evening. She will be in her office." Caleb read the note twice. He put on his uniform. He took the freight elevator up. Eleanor was at her desk. The overhead lights were off. The lamp on the credenza was on. She was not working. She was simply sitting with her hands folded on the desk, the way a person sits when she has decided not to pretend that what is about to happen is anything other than what it is. She looked up when he came in. "Caleb, ma'am, would you sit down?" He looked at the chair opposite her desk. It was a chair he had wiped down in the course of his duties perhaps 30 times. He had never sat in it. He sat down in it. Eleanor did not pretend to have small talk. It was not one of her skills, and she had decided somewhere between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. not to insult him by attempting it. "I read your 2021 Cleveland report yesterday morning," she said. "It saved this firm somewhere in the neighborhood of $40 million. I did not know, reading it, that its author cleaned my office. I am sorry that I did not." "Ma'am, there's nothing to—" "There is. Please let me finish." He let her finish. "I'm not going to ask you why you stepped away from consulting. That is your business, and I am not, after 11 weeks, going to pretend to any claim on it. I'm going to ask you one question, which is this. Do you want to be doing what you are currently doing, or do you want to be doing something else?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. He looked past her, out through the glass at the city. "I have a daughter," he said. "She's 7. I know. Maya." He did not ask how she knew. He understood, in the small mechanical part of his mind, that a woman like Eleanor Marchetti did not arrive at a conversation like this one without having done her reading. "She was 4 when her mother died," he said. "She is 7 now. The reason I clean this floor from 8 at night to 4 in the morning is that the shift ends in time for me to be at her breakfast table. I built the last 3 years of my life around that shift. I'm not prepared to give it up. I am not asking you to." He looked at her. "Marchetti Holdings," Eleanor said, "has relied on external structural engineering review for its real estate acquisitions for 31 years. Every deal we have done in that period has been contingent on a third-party engineering opinion. That has been expensive, slow, and, as Cleveland demonstrates, not always reliable. I would like to bring that function in-house. I would like the person who builds and runs that function to be the person who wrote the Reyes method." She paused. "I am prepared to structure the role," she said, "around your daughter's breakfast table, not around ours. I am prepared to offer you a compensation package that reflects the value you will create, and I am prepared to make the hours of that role whatever hours allow you to be at that table every morning of your daughter's childhood. I'm not asking you to answer me tonight. I'm asking you to consider it." Caleb did not answer. He sat for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "Ma'am, why are you doing this?" Eleanor looked at her hands on the desk. "Because I told you in October that my mother died in October," she said, "and you said that does not make it less. And nobody in my life has said a true thing to me in that register in a very long time. I do not know, Caleb Reyes, what kind of person you're going to turn out to be in the rooms of this company. I know what kind of person you are in an empty office at midnight. That is the only reference I have needed in 30 years of hiring that has ever turned out to be worth anything." He was quiet again. "I need to talk to my daughter," he said. "Of course. And I'm not going to stop cleaning your office until I have decided." Eleanor, for the first time that Caleb had ever seen, smiled. A small, private, slightly tired smile, the smile of a woman who had forgotten that her face could do it. "That is acceptable." He stood up. He went back to his cart. He finished his round. He told Maya the next morning. He did not tell her everything. He told her that a woman at his building had found out that he used to do a different kind of work, and that she had asked him if he wanted to do that kind of work again, and that he had said he needed to ask Maya first. Maya, eating cereal, considered this. What kind of work was it? Engineering. I helped make sure buildings were built safe. Like bridges. Like bridges. And buildings. You stopped because of Mom. He looked at her. Maya did not look up from her cereal. She was a child who said things to her cereal, sometimes instead of to his face, and he had learned, in 3 years, that this was not avoidance. It was mercy. She was giving him the room to have his face without her watching it. Yes, Mija, he said. I stopped because of your mom, and because I wanted to be here for breakfast with you. Are you still going to be here for breakfast? The woman who asked me said I would be here for breakfast every morning of your childhood. She said she'd build the job around it. Maya took a bite of cereal. Then say yes, she said. Mia. Dad. She looked up. Her face was entirely serious. You miss it. How do you? You look at bridges when we go over them. You look at buildings when we walk. At the science fair, you looked at my board like you were checking it. I wasn't. It's okay. You were checking it. I got the triangulation right, didn't I? He laughed, because he could not help it, because there was nothing else to do. You got the triangulation right, he said. Then say yes. He said yes. There were conversations after that went on for several weeks. Jane managed them with the quiet efficiency she managed everything. A role was built. A title was agreed on, Director of Structural Assessment, and a compensation package was agreed on that Caleb looked at the first time for a long time and then signed because his daughter's college was a thing he did not have to worry about anymore. And that was, in the end, the only metric that had ever mattered. Peter Halloran did not make managing director. He did not leave Marchetti because Eleanor, as she had once explained to a man on an airplane in a different story entirely, had learned that a defeated rival who remained was more useful than a martyred one who did not. But he was, for the rest of his time at the firm, a man who understood very precisely where the walls of his ambition were, and who had learned to treat the cleaning staff with the deliberate, careful courtesy of a man who had been publicly reminded, in front of his peers, that he did not always know who he was speaking to. Reggie, Caleb's night supervisor, was the first person Caleb told. Reggie listened, nodded, shook his hand, and then said, You were too good at this anyway. Your corners are ridiculous. Caleb laughed. He stayed on the cleaning schedule for 3 more weeks while the engineering role was finalized, because he had told Eleanor he would, and because he had told Reggie he would not leave him short-staffed before the holidays. On his last night, he cleaned the 43rd floor the way he had cleaned it for 14 months. Slowly, carefully, without missing anything. He did Eleanor's office last. She was there. He had known she would be. She did not make a ceremony of it. She said, Good night, Caleb. He said, Good night, ma'am. He finished his round. He took the freight elevator down. In the basement corridor, he stood for a moment with his hand on the cart, the way he had stood the morning after Peter Halloran's first remark, and he let the shape of the last 14 months settle into him one more time before he let it go. Then he signed out. He drove home. Maya was asleep on the couch with the television on mute, the way she always was. He carried her to bed. The Cheney Institute updated its award wall the following spring. They did not add a new plaque. Caleb had not done new work yet, not the kind of work that made walls. But they did update the small brass nameplate beneath his 2019 plaque to reflect his current title and affiliation. Caleb R. Reyes, Director of Structural Assessment, Marchetti Holdings. 2019 laureate. Maya saw on a field trip in May. Her class had gone downtown to tour the Cheney Institute's public engineering exhibit, which had a whole section about bridges, and Maya, who was by then 8 years old and no longer small for her age, because the year had finally started to give her something back, had stopped in front of the wall and read her father's name out loud. Her teacher, Mrs. Alvarez, had come up behind her. Is it your dad, Maya? That's my dad. What does he do? He makes sure buildings don't fall down, Maya said. And he comes home for breakfast every morning. And she thought about it, the way she thought about things carefully with her whole, small, serious face. He is a person who came when I needed him. And he came when the other lady needed him, too. And he is my dad, Mrs. Alvarez, who had been a second-grade teacher for 26 years and who had learned, in that time, not to interrupt a child when the child was telling the truth, did not say anything. She simply stood next to Maya Reyes at the wall for another moment, and then they went to catch up with the rest of the class. There's a thing that happens sometimes in the rooms of a city. It does not happen loudly. It does not make the news. It happens in the quiet between a woman who has forgotten how to be seen and a man who has decided, for reasons of his own, to be unseen for a while. It happens in the small mechanical fact of one person emptying another person's wastebasket for 11 weeks without once making it mean anything, and in the small mechanical fact of another person eventually noticing. Eleanor Marchetti, on the morning after Caleb's last cleaning shift, walked into her office and stood for a moment looking at the wastebasket, empty as it always was, and at the sideboard, clean as it always was, and at the small framed photograph of her son, set slightly askew, as it always was, on the credenza behind her desk. She did not fix the photograph. She had learned, without quite being able to say when, that the slight angle was part of the room now. Jane came in with her coffee. Eleanor took it. She opened her laptop. Outside, the city was clear. The lake was the hard blue of a Tuesday in spring. Somewhere on the 43rd floor, a new engineer, a man named Caleb Reyes, was walking in for his third week of work, with his daughter's lunch still in his satchel because he had dropped her at school and forgotten to leave it at home, and with an expression on his face of a man who was, to his own quiet surprise, doing exactly what he should have been doing. The first meeting on his calendar was at 9 a.m. The last thing on his calendar, every day, was 3:15 p.m. pickup. Eleanor had put it there herself the morning his offer was signed. She had blocked it recurring. She had made it, in the system, non-negotiable. It was the only thing in 31 years of running Marchetti Holdings that she had ever entered on another person's calendar without asking. She had decided that she was entitled to it because she had been the one who had finally asked. Thank you for sitting with this story all the way to the end. The people who stay for the whole story are the ones who understand it. If it moved you, the videos on your screen right now are waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come home. Quiet Kind has a story for you.